Are in the book of Matthew. We're in chapter 19 now. Of course, I have enjoyed our study in Matthew and looking forward to the last 8 chapters or 9 chapters after this one. A lot in those chapters, and we'll be there for a little while, but and looking forward to covering those. And of course, being in chapter 19 and never trying to shy away from the topic of the text. The obvious topic of this text that we started last week is on marriage and divorce. And of course, I think that was a topic then. It's a topic today. It's no different. And so we'll deal with the scripture here. And of course, the thing that I want you to catch here, as I mentioned last week, it's not just the subject matter of the text that I want to look at, but it's the way in which Jesus approached it and how he answered those that questioned him on it. The fact that he didn't shy away from the obvious answer. And I think that it's important to note, because I've watched a lot of different accounts, some of the famous preachers and pastors, air quotes, when pushed on some of the hot button issues of today, and names aren't important. You know, they ask them questions like, well, do you believe it's okay for, men to marry men and women to marry women? And of course, they act like that's a hard question. They'll say, well, that gets into a whole lot. Those are not hard questions for Christians, okay? Those are easy questions. What's hard about it to them is they don't want to give the answer that the Bible gives. And of course, this is also, I think, one of those instances. Now, there are other questions that are somewhat difficult because they're nuanced, because the Bible's not plain and explicit on secondary issues that I think are not important. And I think that's always a thing that we need to look at. Things that the Scripture don't deal with in any way, or the answers are somewhat abstract. I believe firmly that in the Bible, that the plain things are the main things and the main things are the plain things. The Bible gives us very clear answer and definition on the things that I think are very important. Sometimes people tend to make a huge deal out of things that are not that important, and so it's important that we look at that as well. But anyway, in chapter 19, the Pharisees here, we read the first 6 verses last week, so I'm not going to make y'all read these again. I'm just going to go back real quickly to bring us up to where we stopped. It says that it came to pass that when Jesus had finished these sayings, and of course that's the sayings in chapter 18 that he was referring to, where he was talking to Peter about forgiveness and different things with the disciples. It said that he departed from Galilee and came into the coast of Judea beyond Jordan. Jesus is now headed back towards Jerusalem for the final time here in the book of Matthew. And it says, and great multitudes followed him. So again, there's a large crowd that is following Jesus. And a lot of times in the presence of a large group, it would lend itself for certain people to obfuscate from the truth and to try to kind of dance around answering these hard questions as it looks to be hard. And it says, and he healed them there. And of course, Jesus always was healing anywhere that he went. And it says in verse 3 that the Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him and saying unto him. Now understand, the Pharisees' only motivation for questioning Jesus pretty much at any time was never to gain an honest answer and to learn from the response. It was always in an attempt to tempt him or to trick him or to catch him in some sort of a way that they could find to accuse him of.
According to their Jewish law.
Exactly. And of course, eventually, that's exactly what they did. Because as they began to question Jesus on, do you say that you are the Son of God? He never denied it. And he affirmed it in many, many places. And of course, they eventually get him for blasphemy because they say he's not, and he says he is. And of course, it is wrong to say that you're the Son of God unless you're the Son of God. And so it wasn't wrong for him to say that. But it says that they were tempting him and saying unto him, and this is their question to Jesus. Okay, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? Or we would say divorce. The word is used interchangeably here in the Bible. And it says, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Is anything fair game? And I think their question here implies for any of the reasons given in the Jewish law. And of course, at that point in time, it was as easy as it is today almost for a Jewish man to divorce his wife, because Moses did, in fact, and you can go back and read in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses gave stipulations for how to give a writing of divorcement. And of course, Jesus is going to answer about that here, because this is what they're questioning him on. By this time, they had made it even easier than Moses made it, and basically given any reason whatsoever. You know, there was a way, if you wanted to get out from under your marriage as a Jewish man, you could do it. And of course, it's directed at the men. We talked about this last week, because societally that was how things were structured in that day, and their women didn't have a lot of say-so back then. We understand it's more even in our society, and divorce can be initiated virtually as easy from one party to the other. And of course, we live in a day where it's easy as well. Like say, you drive down the interstate and you see billboards for, $450 for an uncontested divorce, and it's as though it's no big deal. And of course, that's how the world views marriage. It's no big deal. And in fact, it's becoming less and less popular to even worry about getting married.
I like the same opinion, but in my opinion about getting a divorce for anything, that's like dumber than a haystack.
Well, it's not so dumb to some, but marriage is becoming less and less important to people.
Yeah.
Okay, the society that we live in gives all kinds of reasoning, and you ought to try living together a little while to make sure it's going to work out. There's many different schools of thought, and most of those people that advocate for all of those new belief systems when it comes to marriage, the more fringe, and I say fringe, they're becoming more of the mainstream and we're becoming more of the fringe, but the more fringe thinking on it is that, marriage is a construct of the patriarchy that was, developed by men to oppress women, and that's, that's the leftist side of it today. Well, who instituted marriage? Y'all know the answer. The Lord himself instituted marriage. God made Eve for Adam, gave Eve to Adam and said, here's your wife. Okay? So it's not a construct that human beings have developed. It's something that God initiated in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis, and we'll see that here. But the Pharisees tempt him. They're trying to entrap Jesus, because they have their Jewish law that says these are all of the reasons that you can give to give a writing of divorcement and to put away your wife, or to divorce your wife. So they say, is it lawful? Because they have their Jewish law. Okay? Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And Jesus answered, verse 4, he answered and said unto them, have you not read? And of course, he points them back to Scripture, which again is always the way that we should do it. And it says, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And of course, we had this conversation last week. The Bible is explicitly plain on how many genders there are. It only deals with 2. Okay? In any and every place. Once again, these are not hard questions. These are easy questions, okay? And it says that he that made them at the beginning made them male and female. So if anybody thinks that Jesus was confused on this topic, this pretty well clears it up right here. Okay? And he says, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife. And this is coming as a quote from Genesis chapter 2, where God has just created Eve. and gives her to Adam. And it says, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife. And they twain, or they two, shall be one flesh. They become one entity. Okay? And the picture here is they become one body. Okay? Meaning that you can no more separate your body in half than you should be able to separate the union between man and woman in half. Okay? And so they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore, and here it cleans it up, or clears it up even further, what I'm saying. Wherefore they are no more twain, no more two, but one flesh. Again, the idea here being that they become one entity and one body. And I mentioned last week, I think it's no accident that the same picture is given for Christ and the church, as Jesus Christ being the groom and us being the bride of Christ. And we have been united as one. We have come together as one body. And so it says, what therefore God hath joined together. Who initiated this marriage and this process? God. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder or divide. Okay? So, this is Jesus' response to the Pharisees' questions. Are all of these ways that we have listed for us to divorce our wife, are they legitimate?
No.
No. Simple answer, Jesus said.
What God did,
Yeah.
you don't undo.
Yeah, Jesus said no. So, this is where we left it last week. Okay? So, he continues on here after they say, and I'll let y'all read 7, 8, and 9 here, and we'll dig into this a little bit.
They say unto him, why did Moses then command to get a writing of divorcement and to put her away?
And he said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning was it not so.
And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery.
Okay.
Pretty clear.
Now this is not popular. This is still not hard to understand.
It's pretty.
It's pretty simplistic in other words, he's not obfuscating here. Okay? He's not trying to make what's easy to understand hard to understand. That's obfuscating. And just so if you don't know the definition, I had to look it up too. But if you'll ever notice, some people have a tendency to try to make things very difficult and very complex that are very simple. And they do that to try to act intelligent about it. Okay? You'll hear it from college professors sometimes. They try to use all of the big fancy words, and they try to dance around the tree. You definitely hear it from politicians today. You hear it from a lot of preachers that try to make things difficult and tough to understand. And they think it's a sign of great intelligence. Actually, that's not a sign of great intelligence. A sign of great intelligence is to be able to take the complex, take the tough to understand, take the difficult to perceive, and then be able to explain it in simple terms so that everyone can understand. Why is that a sign of intelligence? Because it shows that you have a working knowledge of it to be able to explain it in a way that somebody who is not well versed in it can understand.
It's a lot easier to do, like, make something that's simple really complicated than vice versa.
Exactly. And most of the time the idea behind making it complicated and hard to understand is so that nobody else knows what you're talking about too, so that they don't know if you're wrong or not. Okay?
You can make something easy really complicated.
Exactly. And so, again, what he's doing here is not, what he's saying here is not hard to understand. Anybody have a trouble understanding what Jesus is saying about marriage and divorce here? It's really not hard to understand. Now, have we made it complicated over the years? Oh, you bet we have. Okay? Now, they say that they ask him this follow-up question. Okay, the first question was, is it lawful to put away our wife for any reason? And I think the idea being for any reason in the law. Okay, which again by this time had gotten pretty loose and easy to get a divorcement in. So they ask him this follow-up question then. Again, the idea here is entrapment. Okay, because now he's straight out said, no, it's not lawful for any reason. God put marriage together at the beginning. He intended it to be one man, one woman, one lifetime. It's very easy to understand from the text in Genesis. They two shall be one flesh. And what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Not hard to understand. So they follow up with this question. Again, the idea is entrapment here. And they said, oh, okay, then why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement? And again, if you want to go to Deuteronomy, you can read where Moses gave these instructions for divorcement. Here's his answer. He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you, or meant allowed you.
He really didn't want to.
It wasn't God's perfect plan to give means of divorce. God's perfect plan is for man and woman to come together in marriage and to stay together for life. Okay? Because you're hard-headed and because you are sinful man, Moses gave some conditions. Now, if you'll go back and read in Deuteronomy, all the conditions that they had by this time were not the conditions that Moses gave for being able to divorce your wife. Okay? That they had again played fast and loose with the text, which so many do nowadays, and tried to make and give place for things where there wasn't really any given. This man is no different. But it says, because the hardness of your hearts, he suffered you or allowed you. And the idea of suffered being allowed is somewhat forcibly was made to give this. It says, to allowed you or suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. Meaning this was not God's perfect or original plan. Okay? Man's sinfulness, man's actions, caused there to be a need for Moses to give these writings of divorcement. Okay? And really the primary reason that Moses gave, again, you can go back and read it, the primary reason that he gave is the same reason that Jesus is going to list here in just a second. And it says, but from the beginning it was not so, and I say unto you. Now this is Jesus himself saying it, okay? I say unto you, and he does that in a lot of places, okay? Because they continuously, because they had the law of Moses. Okay, they continuously brought up the law of Moses. If you remember the Beatitudes, that was a lot of the old law sayings. Jesus would always follow it up. But I say, you've heard it written, hate your enemies. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Okay, so just understand. He says, but I say unto you, and I say unto you, whosoever. That pretty much means all of us. Okay? Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication. And that was the primary reason given by Moses as a means of giving a writing of divorcement. And again, none of this is God's plan. These have to do with the actions of man. Okay? Except it be for fornication, and shall marry another. Nobody's going to like this. Committeth adultery. Again, I know this is a sensitive topic, but the Bible's pretty clear on this. I don't know how else to explain it. There is no other way to explain it. This is what Jesus said. Now, with that being the case, let me also say, is there room for forgiveness for these people? Yes, there is. Okay? God is faithful and will forgive us of all sin and all unrighteousness. But just understand, this is how God looks at marriage from His perspective. This is Jesus giving His view of how important and how serious marriage is. Okay? He says, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication. And that would be where one or the other cheated on their spouse, okay? There's no reason to go any further with that. Y'all understand that, okay? But it says, and shall marry another. Now again, we look at modern day. What reasons can you give to go to the courthouse and get a writing of divorcement or get the whatever the legal
Do you
term?
even have to technically have a reason nowadays?
Irreconcilable differences. Anybody here married never had a few of them? Okay.
I hate to bring this up, but one time my husband and I got in a really bad argument, and understand that emotions make us do or say some dumb things. And he wants to, and then he would get divorce papers, and I said, you give me divorce papers, I will shred them up.
Okay. But virtually for any reason. You don't even have to give a good reason nowadays. Okay? And in fact, I'm not an expert on the law. I'm just saying what I think to be the case. This is so don't hold me to it. But I think as long as it's within a certain period of time after you get married, I think you can do it even easier than that and have it annulled without a whole lot of trouble, and you don't really have to give any reason whatsoever.
Early on in the marriage.
Again, yeah, and I don't know the time frame, but I think that long story short, by this point in time in their culture, divorce had become a commonplace thing. In our culture today, divorce has become a commonplace thing. The idea being, if it doesn't work out, well, there's always divorce. You know, we'll give it a shot. We'll try. We'll see how it goes. It's not really how God looks at marriage, okay? And you and I, maybe it's because it's not taught and it's not preached enough. Maybe we don't look at marriage and view marriage as something as important as God does. Because we see here that it was extremely important to God. The very first thing that He did after He created man and woman was He created the family. And that is man and woman coming together in union, and then obviously the result of that would be that they would have children. And here's the thing about it. Regardless of whether it's within the church or without the church, when people do things the way that God intended them to be done, things go better. Okay? Even when society, even when lost people do things the way God intends them to be done, okay, meaning that when a man and a woman have a marriage, even if those individuals are lost, and they raise their children in a home with man and woman in a loving environment, the statistics are absolutely staggering as to how much better chance those children have at being successful in life over a family that is split and divided. I'm talking, it's not even close. Okay? The statistics are just off the charts. If you don't have a home life the way God intended it to have, are there those that make it out and those that become successful and those that become good citizens, those that become good Christians? Absolutely, but the statistics are not in their favor. Those people do those things in spite of their environment, not because of it. Okay? And so just understand, when things happen God's way, things just tend to go better. Okay? And that's with a lot of things, but this idea of the family, and that is why I firmly believe that the family has been under constant attack from the beginning of the creation. From the fall of man, the family has been under attack. And it has been from broken and severed homes and families and marriages that Satan has been able to gain a foothold and to work in society. And it's why I think in America today, the battle for Christianity now, used to the battle 50 years ago, the battle was in the realm of science. They were having the debates, the hot button issue was, do we have prayer in school? Do we teach creation in school? Do we teach evolution in school? This was the 60s, okay? The 50s and the 60s when they had all of these debates. That was the hot button issue of that day. Okay? You didn't hear about gay marriage and you know, all of these other hot button issues where is the battle at today? It's against the traditional home. It's against the traditional marriage. It's against those traditional.
Everything nowadays is posed to pervert God's version of it.
Exactly. That's where we see the forefront of the battle right now. Because that's where everybody runs to when you start talking about the Bible right now. That's where the questions wind up right now. And it's no mystery why that's where we're at. Okay? Because coupled with that idea, if you read Romans chapter 1, as a society begins to leave God, Romans chapter 1 clearly and explicitly states that the judgment of God falls upon that people, and that attack comes in the form of all of this sexual perversion that we see in today's society. That is not people being free, that is God sending judgment. Because the judgment comes in the form of that society. A society that becomes like that completely collapses. Why? Because a society cannot exist without a nuclear home behind it. It never has. In Rome, the greatest empire in at least, when I say the modern era, understand historically speaking.
Past 2,000 years.
Yeah. Rome was the greatest empire on the face of the earth. It was the great empire that Jesus was born into. Why did Roman society collapse? The same exact reason. Because everything became a perversion of what God intended it to be.
I heard a man say one time that marriage and the things in it were the most holy and sanctified things God had made for us. And so that's why Satan pushes so hard to destroy and pervert it, because it is God's greatest gift to us aside from salvation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's such a hard push nowadays to just ruin everything about it.
Exactly, and you're dead on correct. And I'm trying to be as gentle as I can here. When God created man and woman, male and female, again, there's no ambiguity there. He said, I want you to be fruitful and multiply. And He gave Adam and Eve the institution of marriage and the bounds. It stays within the bounds. And in our society, as well as so many of these past, those lines have kind of gotten blurred. And I don't think we fully realize the seriousness of those sins and those issues surrounding that topic. When God created man and woman and said to multiply and fill the earth, the strongest desire that He gave to man is that of a sexual nature. And again, I'm trying to be kind here. But it is to be controlled, and it is to be used within God's parameters. Everything used outside of God's parameters when it comes to that is not just sin, but what the Bible considers to be very, very serious and very, very grave sin. It is a perversion of what God intended. It is a direct rebellion against God's purpose and God's plan. That's why it's so serious. And it does somewhat frustrate me that we spend so much time, because I do think there is an unbalanced amount of time spent on the whole homosexuality thing. Listen, absolutely 100%, it is a sexual perversion. No more, no less. That's what it is. It is a perversion of what God said was right and what God said was to be. Mm-hmm. It is just as much a perversion for men and women to engage in that outside of the bounds of biblical marriage. Mm-hmm. No more, no less. It is just as serious of a sin. It is always listed just about every time in the same lists. Fornication, all of those things are listed. Adultery, homosexuality, they're put in the same list as being all perversions of what God intended. And we are sometimes unfair and unbalanced in how we deal with one versus the other.
It's just like the Pharisees as well. Because the thing is, it's like the woman they brought to Jesus for adultery. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was the man in that situation. It's the same thing. You pick out, this is the bad one. Or, for instance, in the Baptist church, we always pick on alcohol or stuff like that, while gluttony is just as much of a sin.
Mm-hmm.
Eating too much is unhealthy for your body, therefore it is a sin. It's causing you harm. We don't ever talk about that one.
Mm-hmm.
We always pick and choose, but the thing is, just like that, homosexuality is just as bad as other stuff that no one wants to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, nowadays it's kind of like,
Yeah, everybody's doing it, so.
yeah, everyone's doing it, so it's fine. No, it's just as bad.
And don't... Again, I want you to understand, there's room for forgiveness and restoration.
Yeah, yes.
There is. The problem I have is so many people are unrepentant over it.
That's the thing about
Okay? Y'all aren't going to like me for this. You can just not like me.
it.
You come in here as a homosexuality, you're probably going to get kicked out. You come in here with a baby out of wedlock and we're going to throw you a shower. Now again, both are forgivable. I want you to hear me on that. But we don't deal with them the same. Y'all know that's the truth. We don't deal with them the same. Again, both of those people, the message is, if you'll repent, if you'll admit what's wrong is wrong and what's right is right, and ask for forgiveness, not from us, but from God, and reconcile your relationship with Him, you're absolutely welcome here. But just like you can't stay homosexual and be in fellowship with Christ, you can't live in fornication and be in fellowship with Christ. It's not possible. It's not possible. I know that's not pleasant, and I know that's not fun. That's the truth.
Yes.
And the problem is when we don't properly exercise church discipline, we almost give the okay that it's not that big of a deal and it's not that important. And again, I know that's not proper and that's not pleasant, but it's the truth. He says, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication. Now Jesus does give that stipulation. If one or the other in a marriage steps outside of that marriage and commits fornication with another individual, you have the ability and the right to divorce them. And you are without blame, and you are without any that being a sin. Now, with that being said, let me say, I still think that God would prefer that we work it out and that we seek for forgiveness and that we reconcile. But it is lawful, it is proper, and it is right for that cause. And shall marry another. If anybody divorces and then marries another, and especially if that was the reason for the divorce, but that's beyond the point here, then the way God looks at it, because here's the thing, and this is what people have such a hard time about, okay? And I've got one, okay? It's in a file cabinet somewhere. I actually could probably find it, okay? I've got our marriage certificate, or marriage license, whatever you call it, okay? Let me tell you something. God doesn't care about your piece of paper, okay? Just like when you go get a divorce and you've got your papers from the judge where he signed it and said it's official, you're no longer married. God doesn't care about your paperwork. In His eyes, you're still married because you and him or you and her were one flesh. Okay? It's not, it doesn't matter about you. It's like, and I mean, we tend to do it sometimes in the Baptist church. It's somewhere in the attic. I think I've got a picture frame with a certificate of ordination for me being a deacon. God doesn't care about your paperwork. Okay? We made that up. There's no piece of paper that makes me a deacon. Okay? That's God's call on your life. That's God's purpose in your life. It's up to Him whether we're qualified or not up to man.
Yeah.
Okay? Same thing with marriage. God doesn't care about the paperwork. Okay? It's the same deal with the whole church letters and membership and stuff. If you're saved, you're a member of the church. Plain and simple. If you're not saved, you're not a member of the church. I don't care if you got a piece of paper that comes and says that you are. It's as simple as that.
I don't have any paper.
Yeah, this is man-made. This is man-made stuff. I don't know if I've got a church letter, I couldn't tell you where it is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not important. It's man-made. It's tradition. If you're saved, you're a member of the church. If you're not, you're not a member of the church. You can have whatever piece of paper you want. It doesn't make you a member. You can be baptized 100 times or 50 times, whatever. It doesn't matter. It says, he that put away his wife and marrieth her which is put away committeth adultery. In other words, and I'll bring this to a close because I think we've sufficiently covered the topic here. Marriage and divorce and being able to just swap around and marry and remarry and all of this is viewed by man in today's society as a perfectly common and perfectly, usual, acceptable thing. God doesn't view it like that. And I think we spend too much time trying to advocate for biblical marriage outside of the church. We can't expect lost people to understand or to live the way that we know we should live, but we ought to live the way that God intended us to live within the church. Mm-hmm. And we ought to have this kind of view and this seriousness about marriage.
Yeah, because the thing is, even if we don't witness those people who don't live by that standard, if they see that, if we just live our lives focused on God, purposefully driven toward God, that's more of a testimony than getting on to them about marriage and stuff.
Exactly.
Leading by example, not just...
Yeah, we spend too much time trying to hang curtains in a haunted house when we try to get lost people to act like they're saved. We do it. We even do it at church. You ought to live like this. You ought to do like this. You ought to have, and that is true for Christians. You ought to. But the lost world can do all of those things, and it doesn't help them any. Okay? We spend too much time trying to clean people up on the inside and too little time trying to make sure that they understand that they need to be cleaned up on the inside. You can fix external things, but it doesn't do any good with the heart. But the idea being here, God views marriage far different than we view marriage. He views it as a serious thing and as a relationship between man and woman. Hearing this, His disciples then say, and I've got to hurry, y'all are running me out of time again. His disciples say to him, in that case, or if the case of the man be so, and his wife, if what you're saying here is true, it's good not to marry. If it's this serious, we'd be better off not to marry.
I would agree.
That's a natural reaction to some. And again, there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of controversy, and there's been a lot of debate over this passage. I don't think it's that hard to understand. Jesus then says, He said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying. But some people are not going to understand. Not because the words are hard to understand, but because they won't receive it in their heart. Some people are not going to receive this saying, save them to whom it is given. Jesus said some people are going to argue with this no matter what I say. You know this to be the case. Some people you can prove conclusively from the Word of God that such and such is true, and they've still got an excuse and a reason and a why and this. Well, I know it says that, but you've heard it all. Jesus says some are not going to receive this saying. Some people are not going to listen to what I'm saying here, except to whom it is given. Honestly, that's true with most of the truth of the Word of God. The debate really is, do you believe it or not? It's not about what does it say. It's most of the time easy to understand what it says. Do you believe it or not? He says, for there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. And there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Now, again, I'm going to be delicate here. Okay, a eunuch was a male who was castrated for the purpose of service, because in a king's mansion, in certain service for royalty, where they were around a lot of the females in the palace or in certain areas, that was just the way that they did it, so that there was no chance of any kind of impropriety. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. It was also done to prisoners of war and certain things like that as a means of, in fact, if you'll go to the book of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were all made eunuchs because they were captured by King Nebuchadnezzar. So just understand that was the process. But what Jesus is saying here, and I'll sum it up so that we can move on from this passage next week. There's some that are born that aren't interested in marriage and intimacy. He says, then there's some that is taken away from them. And there's some that because they want to be of absolute service to the Lord with their lives, don't enter that realm of marriage and intimacy on purpose. And again, somebody mentioned Paul. Paul never married. Paul devoted and gave his entire life to the gospel and never even entertained the idea of taking a wife.
I've heard some debates about it, like some people claim that Paul might have been married but was widowed and all that.
Right, and of course there again, anytime you hear that, people are now adding to,
Speculation.
yeah, and it's all just speculation. It's pretty plain to me from Scripture that Paul grew up learning at the feet of Gamaliel and entered into the service of the Lord after the Damascus Road experience with never having a wife. And so, but Peter at the same time had a wife. He had a mother-in-law. You'd be crazy to have a mother-in-law without having a wife. But of course, and then other people take these things, because Paul does talk about it. It's a good thing if a man does like me and doesn't get married, because he can devote his whole life to serving the Lord. But he also said it's better to marry than to burn, meaning to burn with desire. Each his own. Paul was not commanding that every male not get married. Again, I think that's what Jesus is saying here. Listen, it's different for some people with this. And for some, they can devote all of their service to the Lord. Others cannot. That's why he says, those that can receive this can receive this. Those that understand this can understand this. He says there's some that are born that way, some that are made that way, and some that make themselves that way for the service of God. Meaning not to marry. He says, and that's fine for those. But God's plan for the average man and the average woman is to have a marriage that lasts for a lifetime. That's his saying here. That's what he's explaining to the disciples. He said it's still a good thing. It is still a good thing today for a man and a woman to unite in biblical marriage and to raise a family the way God intended them to raise a family. So I'm done. I got to go. It's 5 till. Thank y'all for being here.